Greetings to you and welcome to session 39 of John's Gospel. I'm Pastor Timothy Muse, lead pastor here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Alliance, Ohio. It's a joy to be with you today as we spend this time together. Thank you for being part of this journey. It certainly has been a journey. We are 39th session now, which means that we've been traveling a while through this gospel, and we're only about halfway through, a little over halfway through. But that means that there's a lot to really dig into. And when we come to the scriptures, we should always find ourselves digging deep into what God's word has for us. You know, we have the macro devotional reading, which is, kind of an oversight, an overview. But then we have the micro reading. And a lot of this is micro reading because we're really digging deep and we're really going deep in this. If this is your first time joining with us, welcome. It's great to have you here. Thanks for being part of it. And we encourage you to go back and hear some of the previous episodes. We've been walking up to this point from chapter 1, verse 1 up to now. So a lot back there. There's a lot of information, a lot of things to kind of unpack. So I would encourage you to go back there and listen to it. But you don't have to leave now. If you're your first time, you don't have to check out. There's plenty that you're going to gain today. And then you can go back and check out the previous stuff. If you have been walking with us, then welcome back. Thanks for being part of this. Thanks for being part of the journey we're on together. It is truly a blessing to be able to proclaim the word and share it out there in such an immense magnitude, such an immense deep dive into this text. One of the joys of doing this for me is that I get to dwell deeply and richly in the scriptures. I get to go deep into it and really kind of dig out and flush out what's going on, not only from our biblical interpretation, but also from our Lutheran theological interpretation, who we are as Lutherans, how we participate, how we work as Lutherans. So it's really a joy to be able to do this. So thank you for walking with me through it. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being part of the work that we do together. I really do appreciate what you're doing, and I really do appreciate who you are and what you bring. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of this, and thank you for the work that we have a chance to do together. So if like I said, however you got here, if this is helpful for you, I would certainly encourage you to share it. Share it out there on your social media posts, Facebook, Instagram. We put these out there every week through the church's social media accounts. It connects up to my YouTube account. If you don't follow me, then go ahead and follow me. Subscribe to my YouTube account so that every time a new episode comes out or a new session comes out, you'll be made aware of it. But then you can also share it out there. Share this out there for others to engage and experience, because this is how we do it. This is how God has looked to us to proclaim the mystery of faith, by sharing it, by the foolishness of our proclamation, as Paul calls it. And it is foolish. I mean, we as humans are foolish. We're broken, and we're short-sighted, and we're impatient, and we're prideful, and we lack humility. But yet God has chosen us. God has said, look, I want you to do this. I want you to share your voice and share your words. So God's asking us to do this. So how incredible that is for us to be able to go out there and do what God is asking us to do. So I would encourage you to share it out there. Share it out there on your social media posts. If you want to email it directly to someone, or you want to DM them or what have you, then you can go ahead and do that too. This is not proprietary information. I don't have a copyright on this. I'm bringing in a lot of information from a lot of different sources, but there's no copyright for me. So it's not proprietary information. So share it out there. Get it out there so that other people hear it, so that other people engage it and experience it, because that's what we really want to do. We want to make sure that anybody and everybody is experiencing this. We want to make sure that anybody and everybody is out there getting this. That is the whole point that we want to make with this, okay? So get it out there. Get it out there, and thanks for being part of it. So I would encourage you to have a Bible open before you. Always have the scriptures open when you're studying it. I know that, I'm not going to try to lead you astray by reading things that aren't there, but, always have the scripture open before you of your own accord. And I'll say this, and I don't want to say this, but I don't want anybody to feel guilty or what have you, but I'll say this. We as Americans, if you're listening to this, if you're in the free world, the Western world, we are so blessed to be able to read the scriptures freely. We are so blessed to be able to have access to the scriptures. There are many brothers and sisters around the world that read the scriptures in silence and in quiet and in secret, because their Not allowed to, because it is against the law. So we are so blessed as people of God to read the scriptures the way we do. We are so blessed to have the scriptures the way we do. So don't take advantage of that. Don't take advantage of it. Don't take it for granted is what I really want to say. Don't take for granted that we have these things. Take advantage of reading the scriptures, having a scriptures open before you. Your Bible should be so worn out that you need to buy a new one, but you don't want to because you got all the markings and all the notes and all the underlines. You don't want to buy a new one, but you need to buy a new one because your old one's just falling apart. That should be how your scriptures are, your Bible. So use it, open it up, have it open before you. If you don't have a Bible, you want to go online and use one. BibleGateway.com is probably the best and the easiest Bible website that I've experienced. They have so many different translations and languages, and it's really very easy to interact with from my experience, from my perspective. So BibleGateway.com. I don't make any money from them. I'm not, they don't sponsor any of these sessions. So I'm just putting it out there because I think they're a good resource. And I want you to be as resourced as possible. Look, that's the whole point of reading the Bible, isn't it? So you know where it's at and how to work with it and what the resource is. So when you need it, you have it. So BibleGateway.com, and you can use whatever translation you want to there. They have so many different translations and languages. But you can use whatever Bible you have, whatever translation you have, whatever Bible you have. I would encourage you to open it up and have it open before you, because that way then you know how to navigate it and how to use it. So we are in the Gospel of John, fourth book of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John is the fourth Gospel. We have the three synoptics, and then John. John tells the story of Jesus, and it tells a lot of the basics that the synoptics do, but there are some differences. And, and we're in the middle of one of those different stories right now in John 13 when we talk about the washing of the feet. So we are now in a time when Jesus in his private ministry with his disciples, he has moved away from public service, public ministry. Now he's in private ministry. Now he is working with his disciples only because he is looking to them to carry the mission forward. It's going to be on the shoulders of the disciples to make the mission of the church move forward. So John's going to be looking to, Jesus is going to be looking to them. So John spends a good amount of time in his gospel with Jesus and the disciples, more so than the synoptics. Jesus spends a great amount of time teaching and really spending this intimate time with the disciples. And it begins with the washing of feet. Right before the festival of the Passover, Jesus is in the upper room. Now, in the other gospel texts, we would see this as the Last Supper. Jesus is in the upper room, and while he is in the upper room, he washes the disciples' feet. John is the only one that tells this story. The synoptics talk about the Last Supper and the bread and the wine. John doesn't really touch on that. He talks far more about the servanthood of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And that's where we are. We're in chapter 13. And we just got done with Jesus washing their feet. He is now taking his place back at the table. And so now we are in this explanation point, and we're at this is chapter 13, is starting with verse 12. Now he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, for you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, servants are no greater than their masters, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But it is to fulfill the scriptures. The one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it occurs, you may believe I am he. Very truly I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me." Okay, so Jesus, and this is really typical Jesus fashion. He does something, then he explains it. So he washes their feet. he goes around with the basin and the robe and he washes their feet. Then he sits back at the head of the table. So he leaves the place of glory, the place of honor at the meal, which is at the head of the table. He goes and washes their feet, goes all the way around the table, washes each one of their feet. And he really doesn't say anything. He really doesn't give any kind of indication what he's doing. He has a little bit of interaction with Peter, but he doesn't really share anything. And we notice that he just does it. I mean, he just gets up and does it, okay? And so the disciples are probably all like a little taken aback and in awe and not clear and not sure. You know, and there's probably a lot of questions, especially after the little dialogue with Peter and washing his feet and, you know, you have no place with me unless I do this for you and all that kind of stuff that we saw back earlier in the chapter. So he does this, no dialogue with anybody except a little bit for Peter. So then he puts his robe back on, sits back down in the place of honor, and now it's time for the explanation. And he starts with a question. He says, do you know what I've done for you? Do you know what this is? Do you have a comprehension of what's taking place here? You see, Jesus, in the whole of Jesus' earthly ministry, but now it's really kind of becoming poignantly clear, his role was not to come to be celebrated. He's come and in God's economy, in God's realm, in God's place, it's not the rich and the powerful who are celebrated by the poor, but it is the rich and the powerful. It is those who have resources are tasked with providing for those who don't. Okay? So the whole nature of the incarnation event, the whole nature of the God event is this idea of the one who should be served, who could demand to be served, is actually serving. So that's what he says, do you know that you call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. Jesus is not denying his role. He is not saying that he is, not teacher, Lord. He's saying that is what I am. And what I'm showing you is that in God's world, the teacher and the Lord is the one who humbles himself enough to wash his students' feet. So this is not a power up scenario. This is not I'm teacher and Lord, and so you are to bow down and worship me and do everything, and I'm going to sit here in my little throne and I'm just going to enjoy life. In God's economy, the teacher and Lord is humble enough to get down on his knees and wash his students' feet. And so what Jesus is saying, look, I'm giving you an example. If I, your teacher and Lord, whom you are rightly proclaiming, am willing to do this for you, then you should be doing it for each other. This is a lesson that I have for you. This is a lesson for you to see that I'm willing to wash your feet. So you need to be willing to wash each other's feet. Basically what Jesus is doing here, and this is the important part, Jesus is dismantling this whole power squabble system. I mean, let's think about it here for just a minute. Let's think about human existence for just a minute. Let's think about how much time we would have available to us as humans, as people, as spouses and children and parents and co-workers, if we weren't consumed with jockeying for power. And we are. I mean, let's be clear. We are consumed with jockeying for power. There is no getting around that. And you can probably think to yourself, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Yeah, we all are. Welcome to human pride. Welcome to human sin. Welcome to human brokenness. We are all jockeying for power. That is what we do. Now, maybe we're not jockeying for White House power, but we're all jockeying for power. Nobody wants to be low person on the totem pole. Nobody wants to be the bottom of the heap. So we're all jockeying in some position somewhere with someone for some piece of power, some piece of betterment. And in our world, classically, to have power is to be above someone else. That is how we understand power to be. To have power is to be above someone else. To have power is to be greater than, rule over, look down on someone else in some way, shape, or form. That is to have power. When we look at our structure of leadership in the country, We see those in power are those in Washington, those in the state capitals, those in the White House, those who are elected to oversee others. That's how we understand power, because that's very human. It's very traditional. It's very classical. It's how it's always been. We don't see power in weakness. We don't see power in servitude. We don't see power in giving to others. We don't see power in doing for others. We see that as powerless. We see the ones as washing feet as powerless. But in God's economy, in God's world, that's not the case. And that's what Jesus is showing. Jesus is like, look, if you want to better the world in my name, we've got to get over any kind of power squabble. We've got to see that the one who made heaven and earth is willing to get on his hands and knees and wash your feet. You need to see that. You need to understand that. Yes, I was there at creation. Yes, I was the one who moved over the waters. Yes, I was the one that brought light and life into being. And yes, I am the one on my knees washing your feet. So what? And we don't ever see Jesus be angry about it or hostile about it or doing it begrudgingly. We get the idea that Jesus is willingly and lovingly doing this. This is a willing and loving act for the people that he cares about. So if he is willingly and lovingly washing the feet of the disciples, he's saying, look, if I'm willing to do this for you, I need you to be willing to do this for each other, because we have far greater things to do and far greater things to accomplish than to figure out who sits at the head of the table. Okay? We have far greater things to accomplish than to figure out who's second in command or third in command. And we see in the Synoptics a number of times where Peter and James and John, they all, kind of like jockey for the number one position next to Jesus, that XO, that executive officer. I'm thinking of, Jean-Luc Picard always referring to his executive officer as number one, and I can't even think of his screen name now. I know I can think of his real name, but his character's name. Anyway, so we see the disciples all bartering for position, jockeying for position in something that they don't have to. Because Jesus is saying, look, that's not how God's world works. God's world doesn't work by having this power structure economy. That is not how God participates, and that is not what God does. What God does is God deals with everything differently. So those who are in charge humble themselves to those who are not, so that when you're out there in the world, you don't, and here's the greater picture. The greater picture is you don't want your disciples strolling into a town and saying, hey, I'm better than all of you because I know Jesus. That's not what Jesus does, and that's not the message. The message isn't this top-down, power struggle. All right. And so Jesus is showing this example. First, he's doing it, then he's explaining it. So if I, your Lord and teacher, has washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set an example for you that you should also do as I have done to you. Very truly, servants are not greater than their masters, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, then you are blessed if you do them. Okay? So Jesus is saying, look, the true nature of this is understanding that there is no power differential here, the way the classical world looks at it. Because if we live into that, then we're no better than the Romans. We're no better than the Assyrians. We're no better than anybody else. Jesus never wanted that top dog scenario where he's the king and all the power, kind of goes down from above. He was always one who was in the dirt and the dust, and he was always the one getting dirty with the people and touching the people and getting saturated by them. So that's what he's saying. Like, look, you're blessed if you know that a master's no greater than their servant. A servant's no greater than their master. Okay, these are all false scenarios, false things. So in our world, again, I'll come back into the present day. In our world, if we talk about our celebrities, we talk about people who are really good at playing a role. We talk about people who are really good at throwing an orange ball into a hoop or tossing an oblong pigskin, multiple, and not to take away from them, but they're not greater in our society. They're not. I mean, the greater are the special ed teachers and the police officers and the firefighters that run into fires. So, but we get confused. And we want to call LeBron James King. And of course, that's his nickname, King James, from, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they're entertainers. They entertain us. Now some leverage their power for greater, but it's again, looking at LeBron James, where his greatness is not on the basketball court. His greatness is in willingness to get down with the kids that he serves, gets down with the people that he helps. That's where he's great. And he doesn't see himself as greater, the servant and the master. So in God's economy, in God's world, there is no better or worse based on human existence. Kings and paupers are all the same in the eyes of God. They're no different. Now, I know that's hard to grasp, but it is so very true. There is no difference between king and pauper in the eyes of God. And once that's realized, it makes the mission a whole lot easier. Because if you're working for God and God calls you to go into a place where there's not much in the way of resources and asks you to stay there, you stay there. Paul is a great example of that. How many different times he goes and lives in relative poverty in order to proclaim the word of God, and he's happy to do it. He's content in his circumstances. As Jesus says, when you go into a town or a village, if you offer your peace and your peace rests upon and stay with that person. Don't go bouncing from person to person. Don't look for the better opportunity in the midst of the town. Stay with the one who's offered you something and be grateful for that. So what we see over and over is the human condition of wanting to be better. And look, how much is it that anyone would turn down, a 5-course gourmet meal for eating leftover hot dogs? No, of course we wouldn't. Our human inclination is we want what's best. But Jesus is like, look, we need to get past our human inclination. And so if I'm willing to get down on my hands and knees and wash your feet, then you need to be willing to get down on your hands and knees and wash each other's feet. You need to be lifting each other up and caring for each other. And really, quite frankly, it's a quite difficult road out there. Not many people are going to be happy with you. So you need to create a bond of love so that you know where you're going to be able to come to recharge and refresh. That when the rest of the world's turning its back on you, you have a place to come that people are going to love you and care for you and look out for you. And that's what the community is. And that's what the community should be. This place where the believer can go out into the world and confront the evil and the brokenness, but then come back and receive that restoration and that healing and that love. That's what the community of faith should be. That's how the community of faith should be built. And it should be that goal as it reaches out into the world and it cares for each other. So that's what Jesus says. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but is to fulfill the scriptures. The one who ate bread has lifted his heel against me. So Jesus is acknowledging that he's aware that there's someone in his midst who is going to create some kind of sinful moment. He is acknowledging that someone is going to lift their heel against him, and that would be Judas Iscariot. And we covered that last time, but Jesus is acknowledging this. He is talking about it. So he's calling it out for what it is, and he's acknowledging that there's someone in the midst that's going to do it. This is important because as we look into the story, we want to make sure that we're clear that Jesus is aware of everything, that Jesus is acting in full awareness, that he's not doing anything, that somebody isn't pulling the wool over his eyes, that he's not getting duped in any way. Again, we talked about this last time. I spent a lot of time last session talking about Judas Iscariot and that role. But Jesus is acknowledging to the disciples. Now, keep in mind that we have it, but he's acknowledging to the disciples that something is going to happen here. He's acknowledging to the disciples that there's something that is amiss, that someone is lifting their heel, that someone is lifting their boot, that not everybody knows this. Not everybody knows what it means to be a servant, that there are those who are chosen and those who are not. Because the disciples later on are going to ask probably some pretty hard questions about Judas and Judas' role and everything else that's taking place. So with that being said, with that being the case, Jesus is acknowledging this. Maybe a little bit veiled, maybe a little bit unclear, but it will become more clear later. The one who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I tell you this now before it occurs, so that when it occurs, you may believe that I am he. Very truly, I tell you, whoever receives one whom I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. Okay, so Jesus is doing two things here. He's like, look, I'm telling you this is going to happen before it happens. So when it happens, you're going to get it. You're going to believe that I'm the Son of God, that I'm the Son of Man, that I'm seeing into this. You're not going to be like, oh, well, Jesus was a pretty cool guy, but he got duped. He's kind of stupid in that area. No, Jesus knows in advance, and he's heading right for it. He's walking right into it. Notice he's not running, hiding, trying to get away from it. He is fully acknowledging and accepting that this is going to happen. Because that's who Jesus is, and that's what he does. He accepts that this is going to happen. He accepts that this is the road that's going to be taken, that he will be betrayed, that something will happen to him. And he is allowing it to happen. This is Jesus allowing these things to happen. I talked a little bit more about this the last time. It'll come back again, but he is allowing this to happen. But he's also saying another thing. He's like, look, not everybody's chosen, but the ones who are chosen, the one I have chosen, if people receive them, they receive me. And if they receive me, they receive the one who sent me. They receive God. So this is truly this connection. When I talk about the church being a window, when I talk about us being, kind of messengers, it's not our message, my friends. It's the church's message. And the church represents Christ, and Christ represents God. So it's a message that's bigger than us, greater than us, more important than us. It's not our message. It's God's message. We just represent it. Remember I said at the beginning, God has chosen the foolishness of our proclamation, and he has. He has chosen our witness to be the representative proclamation of Jesus Christ in the world. So it's about God. And Jesus says, look, whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. So it's an open conduit to the Creator. And this is important, because when you go out into the world to proclaim, you don't go out and proclaim your own. You go out and proclaim you go out and proclaim the one who sent me, and that is God. All right, so verse 21, after saying this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, very truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he was speaking. One of his disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask Jesus who he was speaking about. So while reclining next to Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it into the bowl. So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered him, and Jesus said to him, do quickly what you are going to do. Now no one at the time knew why he had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the common purse, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the festival, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Okay, so now there's a lot more clarity. Jesus has been dancing around the idea that it's not going to end well, and we'll get even further into that. But Jesus saying, look, very truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me. One of you is going to turn me over. Now, I spoke more about last time why this happens, and it'll come up again. But basically, somebody had to point Jesus out to the bad guys. Somebody had to point Jesus out to the Pharisees and the scribes, to point him out, to betray him, to lay him out for arrest. And that person is Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. We all know him very well. And notice that Jesus feeds him. How powerful that is. One of you is going to betray me. Well, again, who's that going to be? I mean, none of them could possibly imagine betraying Jesus. None of them could possibly imagine that anybody else would betray him. How could any one of them possibly betray Jesus? He's their master. He's their friend. So you can just imagine they're all like, what? No, what? That's not possible. Who could it possibly be that would do this? Who could it be? Well, no one's really going to be like, hey, Jesus, can you tell us? So we have this interaction here where John, whom is the writer, the proclaimed writer of this gospel, that's the one who Jesus loves, the younger of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. That's the one whom Jesus loves. We're going to see him come back later in a different way, but he's reclining next to Jesus. So if you have, an image of Da Vinci's Last Supper in your head, the great fresco, the painting, if you have that in your head, and if you're thinking about Jesus in the middle, and then to the left is a very young-looking disciple wearing also kind of a red oversash. That's believed to be John. John is believed to be a young one, a youngling, if you will, probably late teens, early 20s, the younger brother of the son of Zebedee who left the boats and followed him. And the scripture says, the text says, this is the one whom Jesus loved. Now, he loved them all. I think John, though, with his youngness and his stature, was kind of special to Jesus. Jesus paid a little bit more attention to him than to any of the other disciples. So Peter goes to John. Peter motions to John because they're, sitting right next to each other, and he's reclining next to Jesus. And, to keep in mind, this is a very Middle Eastern, very Mediterranean form of eating. We as Westerners, we in colonial and European and Western culture, we sit at tables. We don't recline to eat. But in the Mediterranean world, in Jesus' time, they would have reclined. There would have been a low table, and there would have been cushions, pillows, and eating was an event. It took a considerable amount of time. You ate, you talked, you shared, you laughed, you cried, you ate, you talked, maybe you napped a little bit, you ate some more. I mean, festival dinners were long processes. And so that's when it talks about him reclining next to Jesus. He was reclining. They were in repose. And so Peter motions to John. It's like, okay, Jesus just said this, but, who's it going to be? I mean, we're kind of a little embarrassed, and we don't necessarily want to say it. Nobody kind of wants to own it. Nobody's going to be like, hey, it's me. I'm raising my hand. I'm the one that's going to betray him. And because just imagine how that would be. Just imagine how that would come across. It would not come across very well at all. So John is the one that leans in to Jesus and says, okay, buddy, who's it going to be? Lord, who is it? So Peter motions to John, who leans in and asks him, who are you talking about? So while reclining next to Jesus, he asks him, Lord, who is it? Now notice the answer. Jesus doesn't say a name. Jesus doesn't point the finger at anybody. What Jesus does is Jesus feeds his betrayer. Jesus, in the act of showing grace, identifies his betrayer. This is a huge thing. I mean, think about this for just a minute. Jesus knows who's going to betray him, and yet Jesus is still willing to feed him. And so Jesus, knowing his betrayer, he says, the one who I dip the one whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it into the dish. Okay, so I'm gonna put a pin in that right here for just a minute. For anybody who argues against intinction for communion, here it is. Okay, so at the Last Supper, Jesus fed his betrayer by dipping the bread into the dish, into the bowl. Okay? This would have been a very common eating practice of having a bowl with wine or oil and dipping bread into it. Think going to, kind of like Bravo's. I think Bravo's is really the only restaurant I can think of in town right now that does this. But Bravo's, when you sit down, they have, like your bread bowl, and you get olive oil and spices, olive oil and herbs. And it's kind of an appetizer. You dip your bread in the olive oil. Well, same thing. Dip your bread in olive oil, dip your bread in wine. Okay, so Jesus does this very intimate, very grace-filled act to the one who's going to betray him. So the one who I dip this bread into the bowl and give it to is the one who's going to betray me. So Jesus, I mean, this is an act of intinction. He is intincting. The word intinction means dipping. So he is dipping the bread into the bowl, something very similar to what we do in communion on a regular basis. And I know, I mean, I've been in ministry a long time, and I've had arguments and dialogues with people about, there's a proper and improper way to take communion. And we see in the scriptures there is no proper or singular way to take communion. As a matter of fact. And really, quite frankly, if we get hung up on how it's taken, we miss the power that it's taken. The same is true with baptism. So John shows us that intinction, that dipping is perfectly legitimate and accurate because, well, Jesus does it. And if Jesus does it, then one can pretty much indicate that Jesus is okay with us doing it. Okay? If Jesus does it, then one can indicate that Jesus is okay with us doing it. All right. So anyway, back on point. So when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. Now remember that we have already known that Judas is going to do something. We've already heard this. Jesus already knows it. Jesus knew it when he washed his feet. There's no surprise here. Judas already knew it. Judas was already aware. And remember when I talked last time, it's pretty clear that Judas wasn't necessarily looking for Jesus to be executed. It wasn't that Judas was looking for Jesus to be killed, but Judas was looking for Jesus to be whisked away, taken away, so that everything could calm down and quiet down, and they could go back to kind of like the peaceful life of moving about from town to town, making a little bit of money and being loved, and Jesus healing a few people, and like the little sideshow, it's the circus that was really cool in the village, but now everybody wants a piece of it. And Judas is losing power. The disciples are losing power. Things are getting out of control. And so Judas does this whole betrayal thing. Judas knows this. And at this point in time, it's not that Judas is bothered by it. We don't see Judas being upset. I mean, we don't see Judas shocked. He doesn't respond in any kind of way or anything like that. I mean, Judas is very clear he's going to do this. He's already been paid to do it. So it's just now about the only thing that Judas might be trying to figure out is how did Jesus figure it out? How does Jesus know? If Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him, how did he figure it out? Who tipped Jesus off? But that ought to give you a little indication. Again, and Judas has probably figured this out. This guy knows far more than not only is he letting on, but most people are giving credit for. So here is Jesus identifying his betrayer, but not by pointing a finger or accusations, but by feeding him grace. This is after washing his feet. Think about that for a minute, my friends. Think about how Jesus shows love and grace even to the one that is going to betray him. Even to the closest to his life who's going to betray him, Jesus shows love. After he received the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you are going to do. Don't dally. Don't wait. Go. Let's finish this. There's far more work to be done, but we have a few things that we have to do. Go do what you're going to do quickly." That's what Jesus tells Judas. Now, again, let's not get up in arms about the fact that the disciples didn't respond or anything, because they don't know what's going to happen. Judas doesn't even know what's going to happen. Judas just wants this Jesus kind of whisked away. And the disciples, they're pretty oblivious at this point in time. Nobody has crucifixion on their radar. Even though Jesus has intoned it, nobody has crucifixion on their radar. Nobody has the events that are going to take place in the Garden of Gethsemane and at Pilate's house. Nobody has this in their radar. Okay? Judas doesn't even have it in his radar right now. Judas has things are getting out of control. We need to bring some things back into control. So, that's what's going to happen. So the disciples are oblivious to this. The disciples are showing no cognitive reality or cognitive acceptance because they would have stopped Judas. There's 12 of them. The 11 would have stopped Judas. They would have duct taped him to the chair if they had to. in order to not allow these events to take place. If they knew that Judas' betrayal was going to lead to Jesus' arrest and beating and crucifixion, if Judas knew that, he wouldn't have proceeded. But this is the trick of the devil. This is how the devil works. The devil is a liar. And that lying worked through the Pharisees. The devil worked through the Pharisees. The devil put into Judas to betray him, to betray Jesus. But then the devil also worked on the temple cults and the leaders to lie to Judas, to sell him a bill of goods, which he got. So Judas gets a bill of goods. He thinks that he's just going to turn Jesus over to be arrested and whisked away or hidden. But the Pharisees and the scribes, they're looking for a reason to kill him. Now, again, we're open to the story. We know the story. They don't. Okay? The disciples don't know the story. The disciples don't know everything. They're not familiar with everything that's taking place. So we are led into something the disciples have no clue about. And because we are led into something that the disciples have no clue about, then it makes sense for us that they're going to kill him, but that's not the case, okay? The disciples don't know that. They don't know that that's what's going to happen. So when Judas betrays, they're seeing something rather benign, actually. They're not seeing something that massive or terrible. But Jesus knows. Jesus knows what's going to happen. Jesus knows the cost of what's being laid out. So after Judas receives the bread, he says, now no one in the table knew why I had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the common purse, he was being told to buy what he needed for the festival. Some thought, go give to the poor. So they're all kind of oblivious. They're all seeing Judas as an ally, not an adversary. And so the idea of betraying Jesus is a very shallow one. They don't see Jesus as being terribly betrayed, maybe just a little bit betrayed, maybe just a little bit. But what Jesus knows and what we know, again, and this was one of the reasons why I kind of argued on behalf of Judas Iscariot last session, because he was going in. He was not going in with full knowledge, okay? He was not going in with full knowledge based on what the Pharisees were telling him. He was not going in with full knowledge based on what the devil was telling him. Judas was going in with partial knowledge. He thought he was going to get A when he started to get B. He thought that he was going to get his friend protected, not have his friend murdered. But the devil is the one pulling the strings here, and we all know the devil's a liar. The devil doesn't play fairly. The devil doesn't play rightly, especially when it comes to the Son of God. So the devil is going to do anything he possibly can to get him killed. And he's going to lie and manipulate, and that's what happens to Judas. Now, the disciples, they're not clear with what's going on. They think maybe he's going off to buy, stuff for the festival. And we find out elsewhere that Judas is a thief. Okay, we found that out in chapter 12, when he's, getting on Mary about wasting all of that and all that money on Jesus' feet, but he's a thief, and maybe they're figuring he's going to betray them by stealing some of their money. Maybe he's going to betray them by giving less to the poor and keeping some for himself. They're seeing a very low-level betrayal. Okay, betrayal, but very low level. They're not seeing anything of significance. But Jesus knows. Jesus knows far more than that. Jesus knows what's going to happen. So because Jesus knows what's going to happen, because Jesus knows what the betrayal is, because he knows what's going to happen, he sees it very differently. Okay? So he goes off to tell Judas to do what he's going to do. Make it quick. Hurry it along. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. I mean, some of the reasons is because, this has to happen before the Passover. And the Passover is coming up. They're about ready to eat their Passover meal, actually. So this needs to happen before the Passover. The time is short. The time is now. Make it happen. That's what Jesus is telling to Judas. Make it happen. Make it going along so that we can get on with this. but also because, there's an anticipation, there's an anxiety and energy. And once the disciples start figuring out what's going on, they're going to want to defend their teacher, their Savior. They're not going to want to let him get away. So Jesus is, kind of relying a little bit on this confusion and on this, lack of clarity so that the point of everything can move forward before the disciples figure it out. So he's telling Judas, be on your way, do it quickly, get along, make it happen. Go do this. Now, again, Jesus is really the only one that knows what's at stake here. Jesus is really the only one that knows what's going to transpire. Everybody else thinks that it's just like this little thing, but Jesus is the one who truly knows what Judas is going to do and the impact that it's going to have, the reverberation effect that it's going to have for everybody and for the world. Jesus is the only one that is truly aware of the betrayal, the depth of the betrayal, and what's going to come out of it. And Jesus lets it happen anyway. Jesus allows it to move forward. Remember what I've said before multiple times. Nobody puts the dupe on Jesus. Nobody gets the best of God. Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen all the time, every moment, every step, every breath. Jesus is fully aware of everything that's taking place. There is no point where Jesus is in the shadow or doesn't have a clue. He is fully aware all the time of what is going to take place. There is no question about it at all, about what is going to take place. So because Jesus is aware of this, he's encouraging Judas to go out and do what Judas is going to do and get on with it so that the next portion of this can take place. All right, my friends, I'm going to leave it there for now. A lot covered in that. If you have any questions or thoughts, my contact information will come up at the end of the session. You can feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer however I can, whether I answer directly or put it into the next session, because maybe someone else has that question too, and I can help answer 2 questions at once. Be well. Thank you for investing in this time. Thank you for investing in this Bible study. It's a joy to do it. I'm Pastor Timothy Muse, and you all have a great day, and we will talk to you next time.